Captain Ibrahim Traore is seen as a beacon of hope, as someone that is looked up to, and people across Africa, not just Burkina Faso, appreciate what he is doing for his country, as well as uniting African countries when it comes to Mali. And
who would dare stare down the global financial system and say, "We'll build our future with our own hands, no strings attached"? Not many. But that's exactly what Burkina Faso did, and the shockwaves haven't stopped. It started on July 26, 2023. As Niger decided to break away from the old order, the usual power brokers and their local partners bristled. They threatened war, wagging fingers from plush conference rooms. But a firm voice from West Africa fired back, promising a relentless fight to the last drop of blood if anyone dared lay hands on Niger. The era of armchair dictates seemed to be running out. Then, as if to carve this new defiance in stone, Ibrahim Traoré, the young interim president of Burkina Faso, dropped a bombshell. "We will rebuild this country with our own hands, without the IMF, without any strings." It was more than political talk. At a time when African capitals line up to negotiate interest rates and debt relief, Traoré stepped to the microphone on June 28, 2025, and unveiled a breathtaking plan. $200 billion over 10 years to fix electricity, roads, healthcare, agriculture, all without borrowing a single cent from the IMF or World Bank. International outlets didn't know what to make of it. Reuters, Al Jazeera, Africa News, RFI, they all rushed to cover it. Analysts called it either insanity or genius. Western economists gasped at the figure, pointing out that it dwarfs Burkina Faso's entire GDP. Some African papers called it a punch in the gut to global lenders. But it wasn't just the number, it was the method. No IMF loans, no aid packages full of conditions. Traoré laid out a plan to raise this money through internal means and regional alliances. For decades, the script was simple. Africa borrows, cuts social spending, sells off state assets, and opens markets to foreign multinationals. Now here was a country tearing up that script. The $200 billion plan was split into 4 stages. The first, already underway, spans 24 months, laser-focused on essentials: electricity, clean water, roads, domestic telecommunications. Traoré put it simply: to grow an economy, people must first be able to walk, learn, and live. His government soon announced over 4,200 kilometers of new paved roads, connecting remote regions to urban hubs. Solar power plants began sprouting across towns and villages, easing reliance on oil imports and lighting up areas long left in darkness. This wasn't a plan drawn in some foreign boardroom. It was Burkinabe hands, building Burkinabe roads, under Burkinabe skies. Phase 2 aims to transform agriculture, the backbone of the country. Rather than shipping out raw cotton, cashews, peanuts, and livestock, Burkina Faso will process them at home. That means factories, jobs, local markets humming. It also means telling the IMF, which calls such investments risky, we'll take our chances. And here lies the heart of Traoré's philosophy: development without debt, keeping value inside the country. Instead of taking easy credit with strings attached, Burkina Faso is rallying its own people, tapping regional investment funds, and converting raw goods into assets that build the nation. Imagine this: if your country has resources, would you rather keep them, shape them, and lift your people, or hand them off cheap and import finished products at twice the price? It's a simple question, but one most nations have been too afraid to ask. Of course, overturning a decades-old system doesn't happen quietly. For over 60 years, the IMF's model has ruled Africa. Low-interest loans tied to cutting public spending, privatizing state services, and opening doors to foreign investors. The results? GDP graphs that look nice at donor meetings, while roads crack, schools rot, and hospitals run out of supplies. Traoré didn't just challenge economics. He challenged this mindset when he doubled Burkina Faso's education budget and pledged to build 500 new primary schools, reopened 3 dormant regional universities, and set up a health fund free from foreign oversight. People sat up. Some called it hardcore developmentalism. But in the streets of Ouagadougou and dusty villages beyond, folks just called it hope. He went further. Traoré announced a national sovereign fund that would funnel profits from mining and agriculture directly into local communities. Norway does it. Why can't Burkina Faso? For many here, it's the first time they've seen a leader put human dignity above financial charts. But beyond dollars and cement, something even more powerful is stirring. This is a development plan built on pride, faith, and a belief that Africa deserves better than to forever play debtor to global institutions. If every African country kept its wealth, what could this continent become? Would you rather learn economics from IMF textbooks, or from seeing your own neighbors build factories, run clinics, and teach in new classrooms funded by your land's riches? Still, such ambition invites storms. Global lenders and investors didn't just shrug. The IMF released a carefully worded statement urging fiscal caution. Western media pieces piled up, questioning everything from Burkina Faso's transparency to its grasp of financial risks. All without hard evidence. Closer to home, responses were mixed. Some local thinkers fretted about corruption and resource misuse. But most ordinary people, the farmers, teachers, shopkeepers, felt a new current. Because for the first time in living memory, they weren't spectators to someone else's blueprint. They were at the center. Imagine living your whole life under decisions made in cities you've never seen, by people who don't speak your language. Then one day, you're asked what your village needs most. A school? A clinic? A road? What would that do to your sense of worth? This is only the beginning of Burkina Faso's gamble, or maybe it's their long overdue reclamation. In part 2, we'll look at how Traoré's local-first approach is already reshaping the country and stirring quiet anxieties abroad. The first real signs that something was changing in Burkina Faso weren't in glittering capital city speeches, but on the back roads of the countryside. In places like Dori and Kaya, villagers woke up to see bulldozers carving new routes through the bush. In the south, near Gawa, mothers lined up outside small clinics now running on steady solar power, marveling at lights that stayed on through the night. For the first time, babies were delivered under bright bulbs instead of flickering lanterns. This wasn't a distant plan stuck on a government website. It was people seeing, sometimes for the first time in their lives, that their taxes and their land's wealth were being used right there, on their own soil. It's hard to overstate what that does to a community's spirit. Local elders in Titao described it best. For so long, we thought of ourselves as poor because we had nothing. Now we see we were poor because others took everything. The most surprising part? The projects weren't overseen by consultants from Paris or Washington. They were designed and run by local engineers, young university grads who stayed home instead of chasing work abroad. Farmers volunteered to clear fields. Teachers helped build temporary classrooms so kids didn't have to wait for walls to start learning. Instead of calling it an economy, people called it a family effort. Traoré's government called this a reverse budget. Instead of pouring money into big cities first, over 60% of the initial funds went to rural areas, where more than 70% of Burkina Faso's people live. They opened trade routes, set up small agro-processing sites right next to farms, and rolled out a pilot program. One classroom, one local teacher in 5 provinces. The idea was simple: start small, prove it works, and grow from there. Still, not everyone was sold. Some Burkinabe intellectuals, especially in the capital, worried openly about old devils, corruption, favoritism, inflated contracts. Could a country with fragile institutions really avoid the traps that had swallowed so many before? Others asked if bypassing international audits might let local elites get away with theft. Those fears weren't without basis. For decades, money meant for roads ended up in private villas. Hospitals were left half-built when funds mysteriously ran dry. That history doesn't vanish overnight. But on the streets, there was a cautious optimism. For the first time, people were seeing physical proof that change was possible. Trucks loaded with construction materials rumbled into places that hadn't seen government vehicles in decades. Young volunteers painted classrooms by hand. Nurses proudly unlocked new clinic doors. It wasn't just Burkina Faso watching, not by a long shot. Across Africa, newspapers began asking questions Western editors would rather ignore. Was this how to finally break the cycle of debt? Could Burkina Faso succeed where so many others had stumbled? In Addis Ababa, Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed praised the experiment, saying African countries should learn why they are different, not why they should all be the same. Even leaders from ECOWAS countries that had long distanced themselves from Burkina Faso quietly began sending exploratory teams. Togo and Guinea-Bissau dispatched experts to study how Burkina Faso was organizing smallholder farming. Ghana reportedly commissioned a hush-hush study on Burkina's solar power rollout, perhaps eyeing ways to replicate it. But not everyone was inspired. In Washington, the IMF responded with carefully parsed language, urging all countries to maintain fiscal sustainability and evaluate large-scale projects with care. On paper, it was bland. Between the lines, it was a warning shot. Western media doubled down. Articles began popping up questioning Burkina Faso's stability, hinting darkly at policy risks without ever citing hard numbers. Headlines warned of isolation, credit downgrades, capital flight. And sure enough, within a week of Traoré's announcement, a Western ratings agency slapped Burkina Faso with a negative outlook. No deep analysis, just a vague nod to macroeconomic instability. The consequences were immediate. International borrowing costs shot up. Banks hesitated on co-financing deals. Some investors pulled out, citing risk reassessments. Most dangerously, domestic business owners, reading the foreign headlines, started to worry about their own money. If that sounds like a coordinated squeeze, that's because it often is. History offers a long list of countries punished for trying to chart their own financial course. Argentina, Zimbabwe, Greece. Different continents, same story. The script usually unfolds quietly. Raise alarms, scare investors, squeeze the currency. By the time panic sets in, international lenders step back in as rescuers, offering fresh loans tied to harsh conditions. But Burkina Faso had one weapon many didn't: a leader willing to speak plainly. In a live television broadcast, Traoré stared down the camera and said, "They say we don't have money, but money is not the first thing. Determination is. They say we are not trustworthy. They never trusted us anyway. So what do we really lose?" It was a line that resonated far beyond economics. People began asking each other, what's scarier, standing alone or being forever dependent on someone who doesn't respect you? Meanwhile, new forms of pressure crept in closer to home. ECOWAS, the regional bloc already strained by Burkina Faso's pivot away from traditional alliances, started showing its teeth. Ivory Coast and Senegal issued public statements warning that sidestepping international lenders could destabilize regional markets. Rumors flew about soft embargoes on goods traveling through Ivorian ports. Some Burkinabe traders reported sudden customs holdups in Abidjan. Nigeria, the region's heavy hitter, stayed publicly silent but quietly pulled out of a joint energy forum, scaled back technical support, and ramped up security checks on its border with Burkina Faso. The message was clear. Bucking the global system might leave you friendless even among neighbors. Yet inside Burkina Faso, something remarkable happened. Instead of panic, thousands poured into Ouagadougou's streets in a march branded "We are not an economic colony." There were handwritten signs, drum circles, and mass prayers outside the National Assembly. People from tiny farming hamlets rode battered trucks into the city just to stand shoulder to shoulder and declare that they weren't about to give up their shot at shaping their own destiny. It raised a painful question. Why do African nations need no foreign armies to divide them, when invisible financial pressures can do it more easily? Who's the first to pull you down when you try to stand up? Old colonial powers or your own frightened neighbors? Just when it seemed like Burkina Faso was about to be squeezed into submission, the story took a turn no one saw coming. Not Washington, not Brussels, not even Ouagadougou itself. A week after the first wave of financial downgrades and media hand-wringing, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, made a surprise announcement in Riyadh. They were setting up a $12 billion strategic investment fund, specifically aimed at Burkina Faso and its regional allies in the AES bloc. It was a dramatic twist that reset the entire chessboard. Behind closed doors in Saudi Arabia, heavyweight economies like the UAE and Qatar sat down with Indonesia, Iran, and smaller Muslim-majority nations. Their mission? Find ways to invest in Africa's independent economic experiments without the usual Western strings. Burkina Faso, with its 60% Muslim population and rare stance of financial defiance, shot straight to the top of their list. For decades, the OIC had mostly stayed out of Africa's gritty local politics. They built mosques, offered occasional scholarships, but avoided economic entanglements that might irritate Western allies. Now they were diving in head first, offering Burkina Faso a mix of direct investment, interest-free credits, and joint clean energy ventures, all with zero political conditions. The reaction from traditional power centers was telling. The IMF utter silence. European financial commentators? Thinly veiled frustration. Even mainstream Western newspapers seemed almost offended, describing it as a gamble by untested Gulf investors. But in Burkina Faso, the mood was electric. During Friday prayers across the country, imams called the sudden funding a divine confirmation of steadfastness. In churches that Sunday, pastors preached similar sermons. That real faith was about standing firm even when the world called you reckless. It wasn't coordinated. It didn't need to be. The national mood had become a quiet roar. We will do this our way. Meanwhile, something even deeper began to unfold. In dusty northern communes like Kaya and Titao, where roads were still half-built and electricity poles lay waiting, people weren't just sitting around for government handouts or foreign contractors. They were taking ownership in a way Burkina Faso hadn't seen in generations. In one small town, teacher Madu Wedraogo started free evening classes under a mango tree, helping farmers learn basic math so they could plan crop rotations and handle small business accounts. In another, a group of architecture students from Ouagadougou returned home and began designing a new communal hall using only local clay, bamboo, and recycled metal. They dubbed it Architecture of Freedom, built from local knowledge for local needs, without waiting on international blueprints. Even simple acts took on bigger meaning. Parents in the South pooled money to buy chalkboards for pop-up classrooms. In the West, women's co-ops organized to build small grain mills, cutting dependence on urban distributors. These weren't state mandates. They were bottom-up efforts fueled by something money alone can't buy: belief. As news of the OIC fund spread, international observers tried to wrap their heads around what they were seeing. Western think tanks labeled it soft power by faith networks, underestimating that for many Burkinabe, it was never about faith in banks, but faith in God and each other. For the first time, villagers and city dwellers alike started speaking about their future in personal terms. Not what foreign aid might build, but what they would build. Of course, none of this erased the real dangers. The country's credit downgrade still meant borrowing costs were higher. Some regional neighbors quietly maintained subtle trade blockades, slowing down joint infrastructure plans. Corruption remained a risk, with local radio often airing heated debates about how to keep greedy hands from dipping into new community funds. But every time a challenge rose up, there was also pushback from the ground. In Ouagadougou, neighborhood councils began insisting on transparent budget postings outside clinics and schools. Farmers' associations publicly shamed politicians who tried to redirect road projects to their home villages. Change was messy, loud, and sometimes uncomfortable, but undeniably alive. Through all of this, Traoré kept to his core message. In one of his final national addresses that year, he stood on a simple wooden stage in the Central Plateau and said, "They want us to fear being alone, but we have always been alone. Only now we stand on our feet. If that's isolation, I welcome it." Which raises a hard question for anyone watching. What's truly scarier? Standing up by yourself or kneeling forever with open hands? And then came the most moving moment of all. In a crumbling old church in Ouahigouya, during the last Sunday service of the month, an aging pastor closed his sermon by placing a wrinkled hand on his Bible. His voice was rough but clear. Faith does not require us to be rich. It requires us to believe in what is right, even when the whole world calls it wrong. It was a simple line, yet in that small sanctuary, packed with barefoot kids and weary farmers, it struck harder than any economist's forecast. Burkina Faso is still poor. It still bears scars of history, coups, drought, and exploitation. But today, it also carries something precious: a collective courage to dream on its own terms. Traoré's $200 billion plan might not bring all the roads, schools, or hospitals overnight, but it brought back something far rarer in this world: the deep-rooted conviction that Africans do not need permission to chart their own path. So if it were you, would you take the risk? Would you refuse the easy loans that come with quiet shackles, just to keep your children's future truly your own? In 10 years, when you tell your story, will it be one of standing silent or standing up? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you stand with Burkina Faso, or do you still have doubts? If you believe in Africa's right to build its own destiny, give this video a like. Subscribe to the channel to follow more of these bold stories. And share this, because today might be the day someone else decides to wake up.